Richard Howard joins me, co-author of a report from UK Onward. You describe yourself, Richard, good afternoon to you first of all.
Good afternoon.
Hi, you describe yourself on Twitter, I just noticed, as a UK energy wonk. So, what does a UK energy wonk have to say about this debate tonight? I mean, it's quite telling, isn't it, that it's happening?
So, absolutely. So the UK energy wonk moniker is really, this is what I'm into. I'm into getting into the details of energy policy.
Good.
That's what I do
We need
for a
someone
job.
to do it, so that's good.
Absolutely. So, I think this is an absolutely brilliant time for this leaders' debate to be taking place. I think climate has become arguably the second biggest issue in this election after Brexit, and everybody's talking about it. Young people in particular, but voters in general, are demanding more action on this issue, and we've actually seen all the political parties upping the ante and talking about climate more. So it's actually, I think it's brilliant that there's this debate going on.
So tell me, what are you seeing in terms of good change, the right direction of travel, and where do you see, the kind of the lag really that we need to address?
So I can see there's actually, people often point out the differences between the parties on these issues, but I actually see quite a broad consensus emerging on the need to do more about climate and partly about how to do that as well. So in general, all the political parties are aligned, possibly with the exception of the Brexit Party, aligned with the idea of eliminating carbon emissions and getting to net zero within the foreseeable future. They differ on the timelines. They're all aligned. Actually, there's a common theme through many of the manifestos around the need to invest in energy efficiency and also to facilitate investment in renewables, in electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure. Many aspects of this. There's actually a lot of commonality now between the different parties on these issues.
Let's break them down then, some of those issues, and try and keep them, as relatable as possible to people's everyday lives, because we hear about, the carbon market almost. There's a market out there, isn't there, of carbon? Tell us about that and how it would relate to our ordinary lives, or could relate to our ordinary lives.
So there is a market. There's actually a European-wide market for carbon permits, this is actually more about power stations and industrial emitters, large-scale emitters, who have a system of tradable permits. And that's been the EU's way of capping overall emissions in those sectors and bringing them down over time through a mechanism of pricing those carbon emissions. We don't pay for those permits directly, but we actually do pay for that through our electricity bills. It's actually all priced into that already. So that's one type of intervention. It's actually quite a powerful one. Is if we can price carbon and price fossil fuel use, then that starts to create an incentive for people to change their behaviour, both at a big scale and a small scale. In the report that we've released today, we've actually said we should do far more of this pricing of carbon emissions. This is what we'd describe, I'm an economist, we'd describe this as an externality, that the carbon emissions have an impact on the environment. And we need to price that in so that people make better decisions.
Well, and those decisions for an individual are likely to be around how you heat your house, how you fuel your car. So let's look at the house for a second. You would look to decarbonize heating. Tell us how we go about doing that, or how you would suggest in this Onward report that in tandem with government decisions we are able to do that.
Sure. So you've actually picked on probably one of the more difficult challenges, so it's a great one. The problem with heating is most households, something like 85% of households in this country, heat their homes with gas boilers. And the thing about gas boilers is they're cheap to install and they're pretty cheap to run as well. And the unit cost of gas is very low. Part of the reason for that is we don't put a price on the carbon emissions associated with that gas use. And so one of the things that we've said should be done is actually to increase the cost of gas. That might feel like a painful move for end consumers, but what we suggested at the same time is to reduce the unit cost of electricity by changing the VAT treatment of electricity and taking lots of levies that are currently on bills and moving those costs into general taxation. Once we've done that, this would drive investment in alternatives such as electric heating. At the moment, those alternatives are just uneconomic. Nobody would install an electric heat pump because it's the most economic solution right now. But if we go through the measures I'm suggesting, we actually change the incentive structures and encourage people to invest in those alternatives through market-based mechanisms rather than subsidies.
And would you support, we have a Department for the Environment, but would you support a separate and specific department to deal with carbon emissions?
Well, it's funny you should say that. So one of the things that we've pointed out is that the efforts to decarbonise across government are actually quite spread out. So we've got a department for business and energy. We've got another one for environment. We've got the Treasury. We've got the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets. We've got the Department for Communities, which looks after housing, and we've got another one for transport and yet another one for infrastructure. It's all very much spread around. One of the recommendations we've made is there should actually be a net zero kind of task force in the Cabinet office, as close to the Cabinet as possible, which supports a Cabinet-level committee headed by Boris Johnson, or whoever the next Prime Minister would be, and headed by the Prime Minister, with a kind of crack team of civil servants behind them to actually galvanise action, coordinate action across government and make things happen. Also to sort of resolve tensions across government, which has often been a barrier to action in the past.
Human beings, don't we get in each other's way all the time?
Absolutely, but it comes down to very real sort of tensions across government. So the government's always been keen to build more houses. We also want to build more efficient houses, but at times the government has thought that adding more regulations around efficiency would slow down the rate of house building. And so that's a very obvious tension. We just need a way of cutting across those tensions and delivering the best possible outcome for society as a whole, for environment as a whole. And so that's why we think we need this kind of focus within the Cabinet Office to really drive things forward.
And trees.
Trees, yes. So planting trees, we've suggested planting a lot of trees in the report. We suggest 1.4 billion trees by 2050. There seems to be a trees arms race going on across the different political parties at the moment. We suggested 1.4 billion. We think that's possible. That number came not from thin air, but is a number actually suggested by the Committee on Climate Change.
1.4 billion across which landmass? The whole of the earth?
The UK landmass.
The UK landmass.
That is possible. So it's about 30,000 hectares per annum.
1.4 billion trees.
1.4 billion trees.
In the UK. I just need to linger on that for a minute. I'm going to plant a new one in my back garden. So there you go. That's my contribution.
Well, and I think everybody should. In fact, I was just the other week, myself and my family, prompted by my wife, planted 100 seedlings in our garden and to bring those on. And we're trying to work with our local council to find a place to put them. Everybody can do their part. I also think we need to go big and create new incentives for large landowners to plant large numbers of trees. So we can do this at a small scale, we can do it at a large scale. It's actually one of the more cost-effective ways of offsetting our emissions compared to other options. And it's something that we could do an awful lot more of. And it's something that has other spin-off benefits like clean air, improvements in health and well-being. It's just something we need to massively ramp up. But the rate of tree planting has actually been falling in recent years. This is something we need to turn around in this country.
We're on it. Richard, great to talk to you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Excellent.
Indeed.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Richard Howard, co-author of the Onward Report. Isn't he one of those people who enthuses you about the subject, even though really you're talking about electricity and tree planting, although tree planting is easy to get enthused about. But thank you very much to Richard.